This video will concentrate on the setup of payroll deductions and benefits. Payroll deductions represent amounts withheld from an employee's paycheck for things other than taxes. Examples would be health insurance, retirement plans, and even garnishments. Benefits represent those things paid by an employer on behalf of the employee. Benefits can include the employer's contribution to an employee's retirement plan or the employer's portion of their health insurance. Both deductions and benefits are maintained on a list underneath Setup, Payroll Details, and Deductions and Benefits. The list you see when you get to this screen may be determined by the way you started CenterPoint. If you started CenterPoint using the new database wizard and payroll setup wizard, then the list you see will be a default list or a default sample provided by Red Wing Software. If you started your new database by converting from one of our legacy products, then the list you see will be those deductions and benefits that you had in that previous product. In either case, you may want to make some changes or at least verify the information. To edit an existing deduction and benefit, I can highlight it and click the Edit button, or I can double click on it and that'll take me to the detail screens for that deduction and benefit. I can make whatever changes I need to and click the Save button. To delete a deduction or benefit on the list, all I have to do is highlight it and click the Delete button, and it will delete it as long as it's not used somewhere else. If I click on deleting it and say yes, and I get a message saying that it's unable to delete the remaining items, it's likely that it's attached to either an employee or an employer record or both. So I would need to remove it from those if I could first. I can, however, make it inactive. You can double click on a deduction benefit and there is an active status checkbox on the screen. I could remove the checkbox to make, or the check mark to make it inactive. To start a new deduction and benefit, I can do it one of two ways. I can highlight an existing deduction and benefit that might be similar to the one that I want to create and click the Copy button. It'll copy all the details from that deduction and benefit to a new record where I could give it a new abbreviation and a new name, and then make whatever changes are necessary. Another way to start a new deduction or benefit is by clicking the New button, and that's going to take me to a blank screen where I can create a new deduction or benefit. This deduction and benefit detail is broken into 4 tabs: the General, the Limits, the Taxes, and the Earnings tab. On the General tab, we need to give that deduction and benefit a unique abbreviation. So it needs to be unique among all of my deductions and benefits. So I'm going to give it that abbreviation. Now you want to be as descriptive as possible in those 10 characters for the abbreviation, because depending on the check stub style you choose, it may be the abbreviation that we put on the check stub style for an employee's paycheck. Then you're going to give it a further name. So I'm going to call this Best Health Insurance. And I'm also going to put that it's pre-tax in there, just in case I have another Best Health Insurance that is a different kind of plan. From there, you're going to choose the type. Now, there is a full description of these different types of deductions within the documentation on the Help button. So if you click on the Help button, you could get to the help on deductions and benefits. And there is a separate video on garnishments to describe garnishments a little bit further. But you're going to select the correct type of deduction from your list. This particular one is a cafeteria plan, health insurance plan. From there, then, you're going to go over to the contributor option. And the contributor option has 3 options. If it is just an employee, then it's just a deduction. If it is just an employer, then it is just a benefit. But if it's both a deduction and a benefit. And this particular one has both a deduction and benefit portion. For both of those, you're going to need to choose a liability account. So I'm going to click on the list and I'm going to choose my liability account called Health Insurance Payable. Now, usually the liability accounts that you would choose from would be liability accounts that are in the category called payroll liabilities on your chart of accounts. When you create an account in that category, I'm going to edit my existing account. We usually have you go to the detail tab, or we always have you go to the detail tab and identify the vendor from your list of vendors that you pay that liability to. So you would need one account per vendor that needs to be paid. Accounts in that category create vendor invoices for those vendors that then need to be paid. It is necessary if you file cash taxes and you are integrated with our accounting and you want your cash tax reports to be accurate, to make sure that you put the account in that category. Okay. Otherwise, if you put it in a different category, then you may not be asked for a vendor, and then therefore it won't create vendor invoices to that vendor. Next, if it is a benefit, then you need to choose an expense account. If it was just a deduction, the expense account would be grayed out. Now, the label says expense account, but it doesn't limit you from choosing any other kind of account. So I'm going to choose my expense account called benefits expense. You're going to get two sides to this expense. You're going to have an employee detail and employer detail if you choose both. If you had chosen that the contributor was just the employee, you'd just have an employee side. And if you had chosen just employer, you would have just an employer side. For both the employee and employer side, if either of those needs to be on your W-2, then there is a checkbox there where you can select which box and code is necessary for that item on your W-2. Then for each one of those, you're going to choose a method and how it's calculated. And different types of deductions might have different types of methods. For this one, it's going to be a fixed amount. Okay, so we're going to have a fixed amount that's taken out of each employee's paycheck, and there's a fixed amount that is set for the employer's portion as well. For both the deduction and the benefit, you're going to need to choose a schedule in which those are calculated. The default is that it would be calculated on each pay period. However, you might have some deductions and benefits that are, let's say, just the first and second pay period. If that were the case, then you would need to create a new schedule for just the first and second pay period. Deduction and benefit schedules are discussed in a separate video. After that, for each of those sides, you can put in a rate. If I put in a rate here, it becomes the default for when I create new employees. It's not to update existing employees. That I need to do on the employee record. But I can put in a rate here, and that would default to each new employee that I create. Since mine is going to be different for each new employee, I'm going to leave my rate at 0. There is an additional notes button at the bottom of the screen, which would allow you to put in notes about this deduction and benefit if you needed them. From here, I'm going to go to the Limits tab. Some deductions and benefits may have different kinds of limits. We have the ability to set per pay period, monthly, quarterly, and annual and lifetime limits for certain deductions. For example, if I had a uniform deduction, I might have a lifetime limit on it. And as soon as they reached that limit, it would stop taking that deduction, or it can stop taking that deduction. So I have limits for deductions and I have limits for benefits. For some deductions and benefits, there might also be a non-taxable limit. That might be some sort of a retirement plan, for example. And if it has a non-taxable limit, you'll check that box and you'll put in what the non-taxable limit is. Now that limit might need to be overridden on an employee by employee basis. For example, a non-taxable limit for a 401k plan might be different for somebody who's over the age of 55. So even though you put in a limit here, you can override it when you set up the employee. Then you can determine whether or not that limit should be stopped when the deduction or when the limit is reached, or if the deduction should be stopped when the limit's reached, or if you're going to continue it after the limit is reached, or whether the limit is combined. If you're going to stop it when the combined employee and employer contribution limit is reached. Okay, other deductions or some deductions might have a combined limit. So I might have a combined limit with another deduction, so I could choose that other deduction in the box over here, deduction benefit. After you've set up your limits, you can then go to the Taxes tab. Now, the Taxes tab will be set by default depending on the type that you chose over here on the General tab. So I chose Cafeteria Plan, so the system automatically moved my taxes to the appropriate section. You would want to verify this information, though. You don't want to just trust that the program is correct. Okay, so what this is saying is that these taxes on the right are not going to be calculated until after this deduction is deducted from their gross earnings. Any taxes that are on the left would be calculated prior to this deduction being taken out. So they would be calculated on the gross earnings. So you can move these back and forth to the different columns where necessary. Some benefits might also have or create more tax for the employee. So if a benefit is taxable for the employee, you can move the taxes that should be calculated on that benefit over to the right. And that's a little less common than readjusting the taxes for a deduction. After you've made your selections, you may want to, or you're going to want to mark that the tax has been set up and verified for this particular deduction and benefit. Next, we have the Earnings tab. On the Earnings tab, we're going to select which earnings of ours that this deduction should be calculated on. So for example, I don't want to calculate my health insurance on any bonuses. I don't calculate the health insurance on any commissions. I also don't calculate it on any pay advances or reimbursements. So I'm going to move those items over to the right. The items on the left are the earnings that it will be calculated on. When we're done, we can click Save, and it's going to ask me if I want to add this deduction and benefit to employees. It automatically adds it to my employer. So if I say yes, it is going to bring up a list of employees. Now that came up on another screen for me, so I'm just going to drag it over. It's going to bring up a list of employees, and I can choose which employees I want to add it to. So I'm only going to add it to one for right now, and I'm going to show you a different way that you can add it to your employees. So I'll click Add, and it adds it to those employees. And then it's just going to ask me, are you sure you want to add the deduction and benefit to those selected employees? I can verify that by clicking yes, and it adds it to that employee. Now, if you have a deduction on the list and you want to add it to employees, one way to do that is to right-click on the deduction and benefit and add it to the employees. So this is another way to add it to the employees. Again, it brought that list up on another screen for me, so I'm going to drag it over. And this list is going to be those employees that the deduction and benefit has not been added to yet. So if I want to add it to some additional employees, I could choose those employees from the list and then click Add, and it will add it to those employees. Deductions and benefits that were on your list that were provided by Red Wing Software may not have been added to your employer automatically when you set up your employer by using the new database or the payroll setup wizard. So if you do need to add a deduction and benefit to your employer manually, you can do that by going to Setup and Payroll Details into the employer record. We can edit the employer record. And then on the Deductions and Benefits tab, we can select the deduction and benefit in the box below. So if there was a deduction and benefit that I still needed to add, I could just put a check mark in it and it'll add it to the employer record. For details on how to set up those deductions and benefits on the employer record, I would recommend viewing the video on the employer setup. You can also manually add a deduction and benefit to an employee. All you need to do is go to Setup in Employees. You can edit the employee. And on the Deductions and Benefits tab, you can see a list of possible deductions and benefits that you can add to the employee. And if you want to add a deduction and benefit to an employee, you can put a check mark in that deduction and benefit, and it will add it to the employee record. For details on how to configure that deduction and benefit for that employee, you'll want to view the videos on the payroll setup for employees on the Deductions and Benefits tab.